we're going to begin by talking about what's happening in Gaza, and we have an eyewitness report from the protests that occurred in Washington, D.C. a few days ago. Priya Reddy, who's joining us, Priya has been on the show on several occasions and was in Washington over the weekend and can tell us about what happened down there, and has also been following very closely events in Gaza. So we'll be talking about that. Her and I will be taking your calls. It's the call in 212-757-1541. We were planning to have Professor Norman Finkelstein on, and as of this afternoon, I expected him to be here. However, he hasn't yet to arrive, but if he does arrive, we will allow him to come in and sit with us and to join us in the conversation. But that being the case, you're welcome to join us on the line, 212-757-1541. I'm Paul DiRienzo. And, well, as of today, the word is that there's some sort of truce that's being brokered, that Israeli troops are pulling back, and that it might be a time of relative peace and quiet. I don't know. We know that 1,800 people have been killed, civilians, mostly women and children. We know that
it's probably more than that. It's nearly 2,000 people. It's hard to know exactly. There's probably bodies under rubble. We don't even know. You know, that's
whole neighborhoods were destroyed, and we talked extensively last week about how the big lie that's being told here, that somehow this mighty mega military power is fighting some sort of war or some kind of equal contest with a small concentration camp, basically, within the boundaries of Gaza. And
yeah, I don't think calling it a war is really accurate when it's really a one-sided slaughter, when one side can decide to destroy a home, destroy a place with children in it over and over. For example, we've seen over 400 children in the casualties, and many casualties have been women and children, and so that's not an accident. Gaza is like Manhattan, a very densely packed urban population. Of course, if you drop a bomb in a place like that, there will be many civilian casualties. And I believe the IDF knows exactly what it's doing. The Israeli, state has extreme intelligence capacity. Glenn Greenwald, who was working closely with Edward Snowden, just revealed that the NSA and intelligence agencies in the United States have cooperated extensively with Israel. So what's happening in Gaza and these atrocities very much are closely connected with what the U.S. is enabling Israel to do. So this talk of a ceasefire, when in fact the U.S. Congress has approved weapons sales and weapons shipment, does seem kind of disingenuous that the U.S. would be a neutral broker of peace here, when we're really giving Israel every weapon it wants.
Right. So the United States is pulling the strings.
Through the tune of $3 billion a year, when that money could be used here at home for our basic infrastructure and healthcare needs, instead of for the ethnic cleansing, to use the term that's being used by legal experts now in the occupied territories by Israel. Right.
Very good. So you were at the protests over the weekend. Now tell us a little bit.
I did go to D.C. in front of the White House. Palestinians and, actually, even Jewish people and a diverse group of people gathered in front of the White House. And just previous to that, there was a gathering here, not too far from here, in front of CNN and Fox News, because the media coverage of this slaughter has been so biased, pretty much spouting the Israeli line, and no critical perspective. So they protested the media, but then they wanted to go to Washington to see if they could pressure Obama into doing something. Do
you have much faith they can
not just rhetoric from Obama, but actually pushing Obama to stop Israel's aggression over these last few weeks? No, we don't. I don't have a lot of hope that Israel has shown over and over that it's going to do what it wants on its terms when it wants, and our opinions are really irrelevant for the most part. So it isn't about what we think so much as what we can do, what the U.S. can do specifically to stop Israel's sort of rampage of bloodlust, carnage. I mean, what words fail us to describe the level of horror that we're seeing. maybe not all the time in the media, but on social media, via Twitter, via YouTube, what we are seeing is just, it makes you wonder, how can we live in such an age of darkness? Have we stepped back 200 years? What's going on here? How can you drop bombs on ambulances and hospitals and schools? The UN school shelter tweeted to the IDF, I think, 17 times, these are our coordinates, please don't bomb us. This is a shelter for women and children, and they were bombed. Okay, 6 times, I believe, and that's not an accident. The IDF knows exactly what it's doing. So this sort of like willful disregard for life, civilians, reminds one of who? Hitler, and so that's not an unfair, inappropriate comparison. They're choosing the same tactics, a racist annihilation of a population. As one, I went to the protest, as I said, and one Jewish man whose family had been killed in the Holocaust was very upset that this behavior by Israel upsets the memory of the Holocaust survivor and what those people suffered under the Holocaust, to repeat these kinds of tactics on what we see as a defenseless population. I mean, how do toddlers and women and families defend themselves against missile strikes? How would we?
From jet aircraft and the most modern weapons in the world. We have a clip. Hopefully it'll play. We'll get it to play right now. It's a couple minutes long, and it shows a recent protest at the Israeli consulate, the mission to the United Nations, where there was civil disobedience last week. And hopefully things work. Let's go to that video and watch that for a minute or two, and then we're going to come back and we'll try and take your calls. We want to take your calls, 212-757-1541. We know that this is this is live. We're on live radio, live television, and we're here to sort of let them talk, let people say what they need to say and what they have to say in regards to this issue of what's happening right now in the Middle East, this brutal attack on the Palestinian people. So let us go to the video, and hopefully...
Occupation's got to go! Ho ho! Occupation's got to go! On the sidewalk, folks. On the sidewalk, on the sidewalk. Guys, back up on the sidewalk. Sidewalk. On the sidewalk.
Sidewalk, please.
Sidewalk. How do I get down?
Sidewalk.
Hold on the box, sir. Sidewalk. Yeah, you sidewalk, please. Take pictures on the sidewalk. Yes, absolutely. On the sidewalk.
Get on the sidewalk. Sidewalk.
Sidewalk, please.
Sidewalk.
You on the sidewalk, please. Guys, back on the sidewalk. Get on the
sidewalk. The sidewalk.
Okay. All right, I assume that we're on right now. This is great. This is the protest that was in front of the UN mission, Israel's United Nations mission on 2nd Avenue near 43rd Street. And what we're watching are the folks who are being led, about 25 people who were arrested by doing a die-in, laying down to simulate the deaths of civilians in the streets of Gaza by having a die-in. And here you can see the authorities are warning us to stay on the sidewalk. So I was actually showing video of the fact that our feet were on the sidewalk in case there was an arrest there of us for watching. And here's Bill Perry from Vietnam Veterans Against the War.
So this is a civil disobedience because the body count has gotten so high that people were willing to get arrested in front of the Israeli consulate in Midtown Manhattan, as they have in different places in the country. And also around the world, there were 100,000 people in London, for example, who tried to shut down the Israeli embassy there. And I believe in Turkey, as it was, they were actually able to run the Palestinian flag on the Israeli property. So there's global resistance to what Israel is doing and to the sort of self-defense rhetoric Israel's putting out. People see right through that and are quite outraged and want this to stop. And now it's coming to this civil disobedience and refusing to cooperate, which is what people see as an evil that needs to be eradicated. And and this is also a sign that Israel is losing a lot of credibility and legitimacy in the world, and is being increasingly seen as a criminal, rogue terrorist state that is not just a threat to the Palestinians, but in fact to global security, certainly with the nuclear arsenal that they possess, but also, as we've seen, their willingness to use weapons, in the words of Amnesty International, indiscriminately on civilian populations. So that's why people are taking to the streets. They can't count on their elected officials. They can't count on the government that's enabling Israel. They have to take matters into their own hands, which are now being handcuffed by the NYPD. But actually, NYPD was keeping the pro-Palestinian protesters and the pro-Israel Zionist protesters apart at Columbus Circle the other day, and did quite a good job of keeping the two groups apart. And it's too bad that there's no international force that can keep Israel from slaughtering the Palestinians. Where that
that's one of the
possible.
ideas.
That's what
I think one of the ideas that's been put forward as a way to deal with this situation is to actually have the United Nations create a buffer zone.
Peacekeeping force. The thing is, Israel wants to remain in complete control militarily, and is not willing to cede any control to any international or UN body, and in fact several times have bombed UN relief structures and buildings and efforts as, I think, an overt message to the UN that we don't really care what you say, what resolution you pass, what name you call us. We want to let you know we are in complete control. We aren't willing to comply with any international law. And that's so dangerous for the global security. That's very much was Hitler's attitude of unilateralism and, contempt for the international consensus.
Well, we spoke. You spoke the other day, Priya, Sunday at the 26th anniversary of the
Tompkins Square
Park riots. And what struck me as you were speaking, and other folks were speaking, and we were going through the crowd who was there to commemorate 26 years since that bloody riot that happened in 1988 August. I was thinking of the collective punishment, because
collective punishment is
what
of
the
Israel's
neighborhood,
doing,
of an entire neighborhood. Yeah, because I remember as a reporter then working for Pacifica Radio asking the police officer in charge why he was doing this, why he brought all these officers there, why the officers had totally, were reacting in this way and preparing for basically warfare with the community and to attack the community. It was obvious that was happening, and he rushed in and he came out with a sign, with a crumpled old poster that had been put up on a light pole somewhere that had a picture of an upside down martini glass, and it said basically, "Your house is mine. You take away our park, we'll take away your house." And this was the rationale that the policeman said was used. Now, first of all, I didn't even believe that.
You're talking about the Tompkins Square Park riot.
Yeah, Tompkins Square Park riot. That basically they attacked and injured 150 people who were totally unaware of anything that was happening in collective punishment for one poster that the police didn't like, that they claimed was a threat against them or a threat against the community. So what did their response? Beat down the whole neighborhood. Anybody who happened to be walking down the street was a potential victim, and many were. And that was the amazing thing that happened with that riot. And looking back on that and seeing on a much larger scale the same type of thinking. One person shoots a rocket, one person does something I don't like, one person in a government or a handful of people in a government I don't like, I punish the children, I punish the women, I punish the families, the people who have nothing to do with it. And many have spoken and said they were not. They have spoken with members of their family dead before them, saying, before this I wasn't a Hamas supporter. I wasn't in favor of Hamas. I was just trying to live in Gaza. Now I see these people as heroes fighting for my freedom and for my rights. What is this?
Well, that's a good point. Israel's actually causing more support for Hamas by pushing people, radicalizing people by, You know, when this happens, when what Israel is doing, people can see where the terrorism is coming from, who the terrorists really are, where the terror is coming from. So Israel is kind of Israel's own worst enemy in a way, in the sense of like terrorizing a generation like this, like they are. You know, you reap what you sow. This is only going to come back to haunt them. This is not what you do when you really genuinely want security for your people and your nation and the region. So this is just increasing regional instability, and I think, you know, our government knows that, people know that. Whatever they're saying about Israel's right to self-defense, they realize that this is not a viable thing. This military occupation really never has been a viable project for Israel, because it relies so heavily on U.S. support and, you know, militarized repression. That isn't a sustainable scheme.
What should we do here then in the United States to try and defund Israel? What is preventing us? We defunded Afghanistan, we defunded Iraq, these wars that occurred in these two places. Why can't we? This is the mother of them all. This is the one. Every single disturbance we've had to fight, the United States military has fought, has happened in response, according to their own history. Might have different ideas about it, but as a response to outrage over Israel, over U.S. support for Israel. I mean,
I believe
why should we live at war with the entire Arab world because of this situation?
Well, I think increasingly people are seeing that it isn't in our national self-interest, national self-interest, to be so blindly supporting of Israel. It was Alexander Haig under Reagan, President Reagan, who said that Israel is America's aircraft carrier, to quote him, meaning that Israel is our military and strategic ally in the Middle East. But in fact, a lot of people are starting to recognize that Israel is more of a threat and a liability than an asset, you know. So and the more crazy and psychotic Israel acts out, the more that's sort of, you know, becoming apparent, I think, increasingly to the American public that's paying for the bullets that mow down, in the words of Israel, they call it mowing the lawn from time to time, when they kill children. And these are unarmed children,
mowing the lawn,
you know. We have blood on our hands, and it's quite alarming. And no one's really comfortable. I mean, if anyone's paying attention, there's a lot of people who still don't want to deal with it, don't want to pay attention, and I can relate to that. It's sickening. Who really wants to deal with dead children and innocent people being murdered? Nobody really. But you know what? It's happening anyway, whether we're ready for it or not.
Priya Reddy joining us here on Let Them Talk. Wonderful conversation. We're talking deeply here about the situation in Gaza and this war, or this attack, however you want to look at it. We want to take your calls, 212-757-1541, 212-757-1541, and join the conversation, become part of the conversation.
And there was actually a significant left-wing of dissent and opposition to this in Israel, but we never really hear much about that here because of the right-wing control of the Israeli government.
Is there someone who opposes this, an Israeli living in New York, anybody who would step forward and break the mold of what we expect people to believe and what to think about the Middle East, who wants to call us and educate us to that effect, would be happy to take your calls.
Well, one Jewish author who's been very good on Israel's, chronicling Israel's abuses and exposing sort of the lie that Israel's putting forth is Max Blumenthal. And I really urge people to listen and tune into people like Max Blumenthal and Noam Chomsky and Norman Finkelstein when they write about and talk about and expose Israel's hypocrisy and war crimes. So I believe Max Blumenthal, I don't know if he got into Gaza, but he tried. He went to Israel recently. So he wrote the book Goliath, Life and Loathing in Greater Israel, which has been on the New York Times bestseller list. So there's definitely dissenting Jewish voices, and it's too bad that they're overpowered by this zealous right-wing.
Norman Finkelstein has been banned from entering Israel for 10 years. Not that he wants to, but he was passing through in order to visit the West Bank, and he wasn't allowed into the country. He was actually kept.
So was Noam Chomsky at one point.
Kept for 24 hours, and basically by association, we don't like who you're talking to.
And Israel wants to control the message. I think that's part of it. And we've seen, by the way, Israel's bombed media outlets and TV stations and radio stations and camera people. We have a call,
by the way. I want to give it a shot.
You know, but I just wanted to say Israel's very much trying to actually bomb the media and keep that message. So it's really important for us to continue.
We have a call. Go ahead. You're on. Caller.
Hello?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to make the point that I was thinking about Nazi Germany and how the German people became, basically they just learned to accept as normal behavior the persecution of Jews. And I believe Hitler started gradually. The concentration camps didn't start right away, but the persecution gradually built up, and then it became a normalized thing. And I see that happening here with Israel, that this is somehow like a normalized thing, and it's an outrage. And what's scary is to me is that a lot of people just are getting used to that. Israel must do these things, and I'd just like to hear what people think about that.
I think you have a serious point there that we're getting into a situation of permanent war, and I think we can see roots of the United States' role in that when President Bush stepped up, George W. Bush, and said that we're going to have this unending, unstoppable, never to come to a conclusion war on terror. And it's been the vaguest war in American history. It's been going on now for nearly 13 years, and we still don't, even though they've withdrawn some troops from Iraq and they've withdrawn some troops from Afghanistan, there's always this fear that we don't know which is the next country they're going to jump into in this never-ending battle against the terrorists. And I think what you're seeing is that they have to create victims, they have to create these so-called terrorists, and what better way to do that than to pound an innocent people into the ground and then call them the perpetrators.
Well, it's sad that Israel is in fact actualizing its own worst nightmare and fears by creating a terrorist response that didn't exist. There would be no Hamas if there wasn't a military occupation, by Israel. And they're provoking and creating the very thing that they claim to fear most. And the caller made an excellent point about Nazi-type tactics and sort of the normalization of these very fascist. In fact, that brings up the phrase, the banality of evil. And that's what they're seeing, a justification, a normalization of what is very much extreme.
And Hannah Arendt got in a lot of trouble because Hannah Arendt, and we were watching Hannah Arendt got in a lot of trouble in the 1950s when she pointed that it was not a unified response. There were folks who were cooperating with the Nazis, who were helping them. They couldn't have done it without massive cooperation.
Well, that's
and within the victim
behind
communities they were attacking, including among Jewish people. And she got tremendous criticism for that.
Civil disobedience is non-cooperation with evil. But Hannah Arendt was an excellent. She observed the Nuremberg trials, where they tried to understand what morality motivated people like Eichmann and the Nazis to commit these what we consider heinous crimes against humanity and war crimes. And everyone was shocked that he seemed like the guy next door and business as usual and just a bureaucrat. But in fact, that is the very problem. This normalization, business as usual, of the most extreme, regressive human behavior on earth. I mean, what nation has consistently bombed schools and clinics and hospitals and children and just, shrugged it off as, hey, that's our right to do that. That's our self-defense, No, it's not. And for us to go along with this psychotic logic or illogic doesn't really do us a service either as Americans or human beings.
So,
or Israelis, for that matter.
Maybe we should look into our own hearts here in America and wonder what it is we're supporting through our government and what it says about us to be doing that. Or, the United States was historically supposed to stand for something more than being another imperialist power, seizing territory around the world in order to extend its monopoly and its economy and its imperial, desires for world domination. We were supposed to be better than that. And what you're seeing, no matter what guise you put over it, what's happening in the Middle East seems to me clearly another incident of imperialism. It's just, it might as well be the England in South Africa or India. It might, the United States in Cuba or in Puerto Rico. It all amounts to the same thing. And you saw so many activists Puerto Rican activists and other people who have fought U.S. imperialism who are joining these rallies. You go to the rallies and you see the magnificent
It's actually
diversity.
quite diverse, very diverse.
Right, the
yeah.
magnificent diversity. Then you turn to the pro-Israeli, and it's just rich white people, and a small number of them at that. And it's clear which side of history does America want to be on.
That point about racial
You know?
segregation is very important. I don't know if people understand just what a racialized apartheid state Israel is, where discrimination is openly practiced, say like apartheid South Africa, or perhaps the Jim Crow era here in the United States.
Priya Reddy, we have a couple of minutes. What's the response? What should we do, in your opinion? What can Americans do? People who live in this corner of the world called the United States of America, no matter how you want to identify yourself. How would you do that? How would you handle it?
Oh, well, fortunately, there is some response, like I said, nationally and internationally. I was just looking up this information. I think August 9th, which is coming right up, 1 p.m., there's a protest in Columbus Circle for Palestine and against the war on Gaza and ending the blockade on Gaza. So things are coming up, just look online. And you have a brain to think for yourself. You've been given a conscience to also distinguish what's between right and wrong. So yeah, you can either remain passive and continue to watch, whatever, the Kardashians or Game of Thrones, or you can actually pay attention to reality and the fact that we, our tax dollars, this generation, is very much responsible for this, this is like the civil rights struggle of our era, or the fight against apartheid. Sometimes we are called to rise up, just like people were against the Nazis, to take a stance. And so I got to say, it is up to the individual to decide what you're going to do. I myself know that I can't just, be comfortable with myself if I'm just going to ignore what is deeply, deeply disturbing. And we are all Palestinian in that way. An injury to one is an injury to all.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. Priya Reddy, thank you for joining us and talking about this fascinating subject. And I think you were the better guest. And I'm so glad you were here.
Well, no, Norm Finkelstein has written really some excellent books and essays and has not been afraid to critique Israel's abuses despite the death threats that he's gotten, the marginalization that he's suffered. So I'm sorry he wasn't here today, but maybe he will be in the future.
Yeah. Hopefully we can move it to next week or another week in the future. He must be under a lot of pressures, and and I know he's been unfairly treated, and he was very unfairly treated by Dershowitz, and by who's basically blacklisted him and forced him out of a tenure position.
Yeah, it's very intimidating
at DePaul
to
University.
speak.
I mean, this is terrible to speak up, and we don't have a lot of time to talk about that, but the whole area of
there's a climate of fear and repression around Israel in the United States, in the media, in academia, where people are afraid to be labeled anti-Semitic just because they criticize the blatant abuses and flagrant violations of international law by Israel. That in itself is alarming.
Right, and so I'm glad for the callers who joined us, and it's so important that we have the guts that any citizen stand up and say these things, that you, Priya, say these things, that I say these things, that the callers call in and say these things, because every time we do that, we are doing something to hold back the darkness, to hold back, to light a candle.
With this much darkness, we have to be the light.
And bring a light.
We have to be the light.
Thank you. We'll see you next week. We're going to follow this up next week.